Okay, everybody, thank you so much for coming to this meeting. Today we have Sonya Mann from the Zcash Foundation, and she's going to be talking a little bit about what Zcash has been doing lately. We do have a live stream running. It looks like right now we have 10-ish viewers. Perfect. Oh. Is it running? There we go. Alright. So we are live. Lovely. Okay, so today we have Sonya Mann from the Zcash Foundation. We will be taking any comments or questions that you have through the chat, so I'll be monitoring that throughout the course of the event. First and foremost, I want to just say a quick happy birthday to Zcash. Zcash turned 2 days ago on October 28th, and they have recently come up with a new technology, a new algorithm called Halo for, it's really interesting, you can prove a series of proofs with just a single calculation, and they're looking to integrate that into Zcash protocol. I'm sure someone knows a little bit more about what's going on there. But yeah, so here is a little bit of an intro to our speaker for today. Her name is Sonya Mann. She works for the Zcash Foundation as a communications manager. And as her Twitter bio so wonderfully reads, she's a real-life cartoon bunny and a cypherpunk wannabe. So, with that wonderful intro, let's turn it over to Sonya.
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for having me here. As was just said, I work for the Zcash Foundation doing community outreach, similar, things along those lines. And today, what I want to talk to you about is just a little bit about Zcash. I'm only going to shill Zcash a little bit. And then I want to talk to you about something that's actually going on in the Zcash universe, which is trying to do sane, decentralized governance of a cryptocurrency. And aside from the Bitcoin path, which is to be maximally risk-averse, maximally change intolerant, a sort of like governance by the Lindy effect concept. But if you don't want to do that, if you want to do something else, there's not really a clear playbook exactly. We can look back on other open source projects, but it really does sort of change things when the open source project is inventing a new and different kind of money. That makes it a lot more complicated and often more high stakes as well. But I'll back up a little bit and do my promised small amount of shilling of Zcash. So Zcash started out and originated as a fork of Bitcoin, and it inherits many of the technical properties of Bitcoin, a lot of the monetary policy as well. So for example, Zcash has a 21 million hard cap on total eventual supply. But the big difference between Zcash and Bitcoin is that Zcash has two modes. It has transparent addresses and transparent transactions, which are functionally identical to Bitcoin. Zcash proof of work is a little bit different, but we're going to gloss over that for now. Zcash also has shielded addresses and shielded transactions, which basically don't leave metadata. The only data that is available publicly on the blockchain for anybody to access is that a transaction occurred and what it occurred. That's it. That is specifically for sending Zcash from a shielded address to another shielded address. It's a little bit more complicated when you're going between transparent and shielded addresses. But the eventual goal for Zcash as a project, as a cryptocurrency, is to not have this transparent mode at all, but to have a fully private by default public blockchain. And the way to do this, by the way, which I can't explain in depth because I'm not a cryptographer, but it all relies on zero knowledge proof. And if that's something you're interested in digging into, I really recommend the website zkt.science, which digs into how zero knowledge cryptography works and what you can do with it. But a simple toy example is that using zero knowledge proof, you can, for example, prove that, say I have a word, and I want to prove that it starts with A, but I don't want to reveal what the full word is, or what the other letters are that are in it, or how long the word is, or anything. That's the kind of thing you can do with the zero knowledge proof. You can prove that, the word starts with A without revealing anything else. People sometimes call it moon math, which is both a gesture at its pretty complex, cutting edge, bleeding edge cryptography, but then also it sort of seems like it shouldn't be possible to do what you can do with zero knowledge cryptography. Anyway, Zcash leverages that to have this shielded mode, the shielded addresses and shielded transactions, which are robustly private. There are other approaches to privacy, but most of them do not have the properties of the zero knowledge approach is that it simply does not leak data. It does not try to obfuscate data, instead it just doesn't leak it in the first place. There are many in-depth technical arguments about this that you can find on the internet, and I trust you all. Like, if you want to read a lot of cryptographers arguing with each other, I believe in your ability to find those conversations. So I said I was going to talk about governance, and the reason it's on my mind so much is that Zcash, as you may have heard, started with what was called the Founders Award. And the concept of it was to align incentives between the inventors/creators of Zcash and Zcash's ongoing value accrual. So instead of doing an ICO or a pre-mine, what they did is there's a hard-coded pledge of 20% of block reward for the first 4 years of Zcash's existence, which is, as was mentioned, Zcash just turned 3. So we have a year to figure out how development funding is, where it's going to come from after the Founders Award runs out. And this is a hugely complex topic, and I'm going to try not to get bogged down into the details too much, but basically, cryptocurrency governance is open source software governance, plus there's a lot of money, so higher stakes, like I said earlier. But open source software governance is actually pretty simple. I think it consists of two fundamental questions, one of which is who gets to decide what to do, suggests the other question, which is who decides who gets to decide what to do. And then in both cases, the further thing you want to ask is how is that decision enforced, and how are the people making the decisions held accountable? And when I say held accountable, I don't necessarily mean by some other authority, I don't necessarily mean legal accountability, but I mean how do you have a governance system that has skin in the game so that if people make bad decisions, they feel the pain of those bad decisions. You want to align incentives so that doing things that are good for the network, good for the cryptocurrency as a whole, is also what the incentives of the governance system produce. That's incredibly fucking hard to actually do in practice. I think anyone who's studied political philosophy or frankly been involved in open source software at all knows how contentious these things can get. And kind of when it's a software project, and that's what cryptocurrencies fundamentally are, like it's a network of software. It's people running a particular code base in one form or another. And so really what it boils down to is convincing people to run your software. And this is a fundamental difference from how government in the physical world works. And the word governance suggests government
But really, software governance is very different because of the ability to fork or the ability to not use the software at all. That really changes the dynamics. And in particular, when you're an open source code base, where it has this flexible intellectual property setup, anyone can take and copy the code. You have the option of writing. Basically, your option is to write software that enough of the network is okay with that they will run the software, or split off. Relinquish the network effect because the features that you care about that the rest of the people on the network don't want for whatever reason are important enough to you that you're willing to split off and forego, say, in this example, would be the Zcash name. And this actually happened. There's a longtime Zcash community member who was seeing this discussion around the Founders Award and future development funding. Slight background here, there's been a lot of people want to extend or create a new version of the Founders Award that is totally focused on development funding. So not the same as the Founders Award, but conceptually, in structure, very similar. Basically, protocol-based development funding. And this longtime community member was very opposed to that. So he was like, all right, well, I care about this enough, and I think that my vision for Zcash is unlikely enough to happen, that I'm just going to fork and create another project. So he created Ycash. And that kind of dynamic you don't have with your city council, say. You go to your city council, and it sounds like they're going to, using an easy example, it sounds like they're going to raise taxes, and you don't want them to raise taxes. But you kind of have no other option. You can't take your house into a different jurisdiction. But in the open source world, in the software world, you can. You can either replicate your house somewhere else and build whatever thing that you wanted to do that wasn't allowed, or you can avoid whatever thing they were going to do that you didn't want because there's no fundamental scarcity of land. It really changes the power dynamic. And at this point, I feel like I've been talking for a while, and I would really like to hear what you guys think. I sort of want to frame this more as a provocation rather than a lecture. That's kind of what the cryptocurrency world is about. It's about questioning things for yourself and going on your own rabbit holes of discovery. And I don't know, it's cool to learn from people who have different perspectives, etc. I'm just rambling now. Does somebody have a thought that was brought up by this topic? We can riff off of each other.
So I'm more of a
or I can keep going. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I'm more of a long-term Bitcoin fan. Do you specifically target certain sectors of communities, or what is the long-term goal with Zcash? Do you want to be a Bitcoin or be something different, or maybe a different name for yourself, or what is the long-term goal?
In terms of adoption strategy?
Yeah, well, I guess all of your long-term goals, where do they fit in terms of what Bitcoin is attempting, which is more like creating a digital gold that would be potentially used for central banks and that sort of thing.
I would say, I'm sorry, is there some way to make it not echo? Maybe not. I wonder, can I turn off audio somewhere? I don't know. I would say Zcash is interested in being a store of value. It's still predicated on the kind of Austrian economics paradigm. But the Zcash community, which is an entity that is not really an entity, it's made up of lots of different disparate actors who have different motivations and viewpoints. So I'm generalizing, but to generalize, the Zcash community is much more interested in being a medium of exchange than the Bitcoin community seems to be. I'm not that deep into Bitcoin these days because I just don't have enough time to go deep on two communities. But that seems to be a big difference. I think we're not as strident about the hard money economics aspect. I think it's it's not discussed that often. I mean, really, the difference between Zcash and Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is, to put it in it's Panopticon coin. Like, I actually think that Bitcoin has worse privacy than the current financial system. So Zcash is like, if you care about privacy, it has a similar value proposition to Monero, but a different implementation of it, and somewhat a different cultural flavor. But really, they're all aiming at the same thing, which is that it's totally insane to have, Ian Myers likes to call Bitcoin Twitter for your bank account. Like, just broadcasting all of your financial information is not viable. Even if you just look at businesses, it's just not viable. Like, name a business that would be okay with broadcasting every transaction, every supplier relationship. And also even like where the money of their customers is coming from. That's a lot of liability and risk that nobody really wants. Like, fungibility is important, and if you have a history attached to every coin, it's just fundamentally not fungible. And mixing doesn't fix this because you can do probabilistic analysis and watch the network over time. You can be an active attacker and target addresses and then watch where the coins that you sent go. And you can trace the relationships between decoys. Granted, I don't want to get too much into the technical territory here because, like I said, I'm not an expert at all. And I think it gets more complicated when you have truly huge anonymity sets. Like, I think Monero and Zcoin have both been looking at Lelantis, which does something with bulletproofs, and that's kind of where I tap out on the details. Does that answer your question? Does that make sense in terms of how Zcash differentiates?
Yeah, I'm not terribly familiar with Zcash. It's not a coin that I actually use, but I mean, I do support the philosophical concepts that much of what the Zcash community does. Do you know how many, what percentage of transactions are shielded?
A small percentage.
Yeah.
It's a big drawback. The technical requirements, both for, say, exchanges or wallets supporting them, have been too high. And then also, until about a year ago, they were just not efficient at all. Now, shielded transactions are pretty quick, but the UX, especially the developer UX, needs a lot to be desired. And people are definitely actively working on it. Sometimes I try to remind myself that, Zcash is only 3 years old. I can't expect that much. That said, though, we do have high expectations and high goals, but it's been somewhat frustratingly slow progress. And a lot of that has just been that the cryptography is difficult, and getting that part worked out takes a lot of time and research effort.
Okay, yeah, I completely understand. Is there a long-term goal to create more shielded address usage?
Yes, and I wish this would be a good thing to ask the Electric Coin Company about, because they have a couple of internal teams that have been working on tooling specifically for mobile wallets and light clients, so that you don't have to download the entire frickin' blockchain before you can do a shielded transaction. You know what? I'm curious. What do you think Zcash should do about the Founders Award Future Development Funding debate? Would it be better to, sunset protocol-based development funding, figure out something that's not based on the block reward that's usually given entirely to miners? Or should we do some percentage of that and have the money allocated somehow to some amount of entities that are working on Zcash? Which of those paths do you think is better?
I think it's kind of a difficult question to answer. I guess I think it depends more on the needs of what Zcash needs. If it's needed to fund actual Zcash development, and Zcash dies without the development fund, then yeah, I guess you would say you need it. But if it's a question of, well, miners don't have security because they don't have the block reward that they need to provide the security, then maybe it should go to the miners instead. I'm not technically familiar with all of the things that Zcash has going for it, so I guess I can't. That would be my reasoning, though.
I'll back up for a second. Is cryptocurrency governance something that you think about at all when you're when you're finding out about a new cryptocurrency or thinking about the landscape, whatever?
It definitely, I'm mostly a Bitcoin person, so I guess it is something that I certainly do think about in terms of attack vectors or centralization. Definitely not something that I want a lot of centralization in a cryptocurrency. Whereas in Zcash, I think that is a significant issue, but I consider that the Zcash development fund is authentic. It's not used to attack the very cryptocurrency which it's trying to develop. So maybe from that perspective, it's not a huge concern for me for Zcash. I think Zcash faces...
You're exactly right that it is centralized, and that's like a lot of what's made it so difficult to decide where to go next. Is we want more decentralized governance, but we also don't want plutocracy, which is that for me personally, that's my big problem with any kind of on-chain state-based voting. Is like, yes, it's civil resistant, but I don't want the whales to be in charge. So there's a problem there. If you do voting systems that aren't state-based, you can't have them be anonymous because then they're civil attacks. So voting is very problematic. And then it becomes a question of like, who even is the person you're going to decentralize governance to? Like, is it users? Is it miners? Is it, investors who have a big stake? Like, it becomes very difficult in practice. If any of you have a solution, or I'd actually even be interested in your immediate impression on hearing that. Like, what does it make you think of?
My general thought just on governance is that it needs to be more of a user-based focus than it does on a
a subset of the users.
Yeah, like it shouldn't be just a small section of individuals that are responsible for developing, or it's a difficult question to answer, and this debate goes on in pretty much every cryptocurrency out there. So it would probably be something that for a longer discussion, I would say.
I wonder. So there's one way of looking at it is what rights should users or holders of a particular cryptocurrency, what rights should they have? And should those rights be enforced by code, by social norm, both? I don't really have a settled answer to this, and I think you're right that no one does, or rather there are many, many different answers. And it's interesting to think about the standard open source world. You have several different models that people have loosely broken out into. Like, you have the benevolent dictator for life model. You have there's some kind of foundation that is in charge and has like various committees and working groups that do things kind of model. You can have an informal like council of core developers that does things by consensus. I think that's especially common on smaller scales. And then I guess with cryptocurrency, you have this new fork-based thing that's, well, it's not new. I mean, you can always fork an open source project. So I guess that's the fourth thing, is you can always fork.
At the very least, I would say that users should be entitled to a known monetary policy, which is definitely something we don't have in central banking, and probably the biggest reason why I chose to adopt Bitcoin to begin with was because I have no idea what Federal Reserve or any other central banks are going to be doing a year from now or 10 years from now, or what my money is going to be even worth, because I don't know what the supply is going to be. Whereas with cryptocurrency, that is something that is pretty much set in stone. That's very much the social contract. If that was ever tried to be changed on Bitcoin, it certainly would be very contentious and lead to a fork. I would say permissionless should definitely be another big thing that users should be entitled to have. Those are probably the two biggest ones at the very least, on top of probably many more. I think privacy is definitely something that should be considered, depending on the technical merits of whatever it is that is attempting to be achieved and the ability to achieve them.
Maybe a way to put it would be that the privacy properties should be clearly communicated, whatever they may be.
Yeah, I would say that would be sufficient. With Bitcoin, we know it's only pseudo-anonymous, so everybody should be aware that Bitcoin is not this purely anonymous cryptocurrency that everybody thought it was in the beginning.
Yeah, and honestly, Zcash isn't either. Like, a lot of people think, aren't necessarily acquainted with the nuances, so there's this assumption, and this is a big advantage that Monero has, is that its privacy model applies to all users no matter how they're using it.
Yes.
Whereas with Zcash, there are these two different options, and the one that most exchanges and third-party wallets support is the not private option. So people have this conception like, oh, Zcash, I'm using a private thing, but you're not necessarily. It depends on how you're using it.
Yes, very much.
Kind of on that line, I have a question. What exactly are the implications for people using the mass or the shielded transactions if so many of them are unshielded?
Well, Zcash still, the way that the anonymity set of shielded transactions works is that it grows. Your anonymity set is everyone who has ever previously done a shielded transaction. I can't go deeper into how it works. That's what the cryptographers tell me. But basically, Zcash's anonymity set, for example, the anonymity set of a shielded Zcash transaction is already vastly dwarfs the anonymity set of a single Monero transaction. I don't remember what the decoy set is for Monero. I want to say it's like 11 or something, but that could be wrong. And I actually don't remember off the top of my head the decoy set for shielded transactions, but it also grows continually as more are made. It's more of a user experience weakness than it is a robustness of anonymity weakness. Modulo, maybe there are cryptography flaws that we don't know about yet, but that is true of all cryptography ever used in any product. Just software always has bugs. It's just reality. We have to deal with it. So I'm using the assumption that the cryptography is sound, and based on everything that we know today, it is sound, but you can't prove a negative. So this applies to all cryptography, and also is maybe not a caveat that I need to go into. But I'm sorry, I've forgotten where I was going with my answer to your question. I'm tripping all over myself to try and add caveats.
Just if you had anything else to add for implications to.
Oh yeah, what I was trying to say is that the robustness of shielded transactions is very, very good, but the problem with Zcash privacy is mainly that people don't know that they have to opt in to shielded transactions, or that shielded transactions are inaccessible to them for a variety of reasons, either because light clients are only currently coming out, so if you want to do shielded transactions without spending 2 days downloading the blockchain, that's finally starting to be available, but it hasn't been for a very long time. For 3 years, essentially, give or take a couple of months. Similar with mobile wallets, it's been held up by the same things that I was mentioning earlier in terms of difficulties with making the cryptography efficient. So I would say it's like behavioral patterns problems are the problems with Zcash privacy more than the implement, like the technical aspects of the privacy are pretty solid, but this making it accessible, also scalability is like a whole nother debate. The electric coin company, maybe I should mention that the electric coin company used to be called the Zcash company, and it's the startup that has been focused on Zcash and the entity most closely associated with Zcash for most of its existence. I don't like to say that the electric coin company invented Zcash because it didn't. Like, it's just complicated. The Founders Award really makes everything very difficult to talk about. The Founders Award isn't directly allocated to the electric coin company. It's allocated to individuals who are associated with the invention of Zcash, some large portion of which ended up working at the electric coin company. I sort of hate that every time I talk about Zcash, I end up going on these like bureaucratic side trips, but I don't know, I don't want to gloss over the reality.
Yeah, especially if we're talking
maybe
about
only a little bit of the reality.
governance, you know.
I was wondering if the entire supply of Zcash is actually auditable the way it is with Bitcoin. When you have the shielded transaction pool, I'm assuming that you can't audit the supply in the shielded transaction pool. Is that correct?
That's
Yes.
something that's easy.
You can, yes, with caveats. So in the sense that you're thinking of auditing in the like strongest sense of auditing, you're correct. You can, there is counterfeit detection that you can do with other metrics. Is there a good place for me to share a link with you guys, like maybe the YouTube chat or something?
If you go to the YouTube chat, you can paste a link there.
Okay, I'm not sure, it would take me too long to do that, but you can look at rates of transactions, and you can look at the transparent pool, you can look at movement out of the sprout pool, so you can kind of tell what's going on, but basically no, you definitely can't audit the supply to the same extent or to the same like fullness that you can Bitcoin, or even really in fundamentally the same way. Because, yeah, that's the zero knowledge makes it that way. It's definitely a trade-off. And it really depends, I think what you prefer depends on whether you prioritize privacy or whether you prioritize, I don't know, sort of risk aversion in the cryptography that you're relying on. Or, yeah, actually that's pretty much the big thing is risk aversion. It depends on how battle tested you require the cryptography that you're relying on to be.
So just kind of going off that, a while ago there was a Bitcoin private found that someone had mined like several 100,000 coins into the shielded pool. I was wondering if has been any analysis done for Zcash onto whether that's an appropriate or a possible attack vector.
I'm not familiar enough with what happened with Bitcoin private. Actually, I'm not familiar with it at all. So I don't know if I can make an exact comparison, but I can say that people do keep an eye on indicators of Zcash supply. I'm not sure, so I don't know whether Zcash is vulnerable to the exact same attack. Was it based on hash power, or how did?
It was more done during the initial mining process of it, so it's probably not the same. It would not probably be possible for the same for Zcash, I'm assuming. But then again, I'm not an expert on Zcash, so I assume that it probably wouldn't be possible. But maybe there's another way to do it. I don't know.
It could be possible, but insanely expensive. That's a possibility also.
Okay.
I mean, you can look at, I think NiceHash is what it is, and I feel like if you just price 51% attacks based on the hash power needed, you're underpricing them. Because if you look at the prices just based on hash power, they're crazy cheap, and you would expect people to be grabbing that low-hanging fruit, but they're not, so it must actually be more expensive. I'm guessing the like risk and finally running off with the money part is substantially harder than we tend to think.
Yeah.
I could just keep talking more, but I'm not sure that it would actually be interesting. Oh yeah, what do you want to say?
I was going to ask for in terms of collision resistance, do you know what algorithm, how secure Zcash is? Is it SHA-256 algorithm or is it secure?
Can someone repeat the question louder?
So I was wondering if I've been hearing a lot about quantum computers and how they're able to hash out algorithms, and in terms of cryptocurrency, is it a threat? What do you think of quantum computers in terms of a threat to algorithms such as 256 and
So I can tell you two things, both of which are based on just hearing cryptographers talk to each other a lot. One is that the cryptographers are not especially worried about the quantum stuff, and two is that specifically in the zero knowledge world, people are figuring out how to make quantum resistant ZK crypto. But I wish that I had more technical background to go into it, but I really don't. Were you about to say something?
So something I've been interested in, and I was actually earlier today and yesterday, I was trying to read the 21-page long paper that was released back in September about Halo, and unfortunately I'm not well versed enough in math. I don't know what homomorphic functions are and stuff like that. So if you could give us just a basic breakdown of what is Halo and what are the possible implications of this new Halo technology.
I'm so sorry, but I can't. I just do not understand Halo at all. It's interesting. I spend a lot of time with cryptographers. I listen to cryptographers talk about cryptography a fair bit, just because my coworkers and the Zcash ecosystem both have a ton of cryptographers. But I also lack the math background, and frankly, this is another risk thing, right? Some people would be I don't want to trust it unless I can personally read those papers, deconstruct it, check that the math is right. I'm not that kind of person. I'm never gonna read the Bitcoin source code ever. I'm not doing that. I've read the first couple of pages of the white paper. I think it's important for all users to understand cryptocurrency to an extent, but only to an extent. And that also you can make a lot of, the world involves making a lot of bets. So I'm making a bet, basically, that, one, these cryptographers who I've heard of the most, who I've read the most of their blog posts and stuff, who I've hung out with the most, these are the cryptographers who are correct. Because, of course, in any expert field, the experts vehemently disagree with each other about everything. Or maybe not everything, but a lot of things. And I'm making a bet that it doesn't have some catastrophic vulnerability. I'm making a bet that other people are validating things. And thank God for obsessive nerds who are going to do something rebuild everything from source and check every single checksum. I'm not living my life that way. And then I also I don't know. I don't have the math capacity to really go deep on that stuff. I don't have the passion for it that you need to subject yourself to lots of very long PDFs with lots of terrible graphics in them. I guess you're that type of person, and I commend you because the rest of us lazy asses need you to make sure that the software that we use isn't terrible. Thank you.
I try. I like to read white papers, but the academic papers are too often over my head. Computer science.
You're not the only one. People have been complaining about Snarktember well into this month. Only a couple of days ago, people were complaining about Snarktember. There are just too many papers coming out too often, and then there are too many talks about those papers, and it's just more than anyone can keep up with. Especially and that's even the professors and the people who are focused on zero knowledge stuff full time. So I think if you have a life or a job that's outside of that, I don't know how you could possibly try to keep up.
It's been a little bit difficult, but we have a question from the YouTube comments here. Hopefully this one has a little bit less to do with abstract algebra. But John says, what is ZF grants?
ZF grant? Oh, okay. I can explain it. The Zcash Foundation, since its beginning, has had a grants program. And ZF Grants is the latest iteration of that. It's a platform for people to apply to the Zcash Foundation and, to an extent, the Zcash community for funding. So it's modeled on the narrow form funding system, and the core of it is like, hi, here, I want to do XYZ thing. Here's my plan. Here's how much ZEC I would like for that. And then the other side of it is like, oh, okay, does that seem like a good idea? Do you have a reasonable plan here? Do you seem like you'd actually be able to get it done? And then there's a little bit of give and take there in terms of refining proposals or, deciding like maybe this isn't actually a good fit. This is especially from the Zcash Foundation's perspective. Like, what do we want to fund? Is this actually going to move the needle for the Zcash ecosystem, or is it an important or useful resource? Also, do we think this person can pull it off? That kind of thing. So then you assess it and you decide whether to give them money or not. So it is still under development. We're planning a refresh of ZF grants, hopefully early 2020, but I can't make any exact promises, just because software timelines are hard. But the TLDR is that it's our website for making grants and evaluating grants.
Okay, so what sorts of projects do you typically look to fund? Are those more like research projects, things that are looking to build up the base Zcash codebase, or maybe projects that are using Zcash, maybe some third-party service or something like that that's trying to integrate Zcash? What sorts of things do you look to fund?
Let's say all of the above is theoretically eligible, but right now we're most focused on open source tools for the Zcash ecosystem. So maybe another way to put that would be like tools that make it easier to use and interact with Zcash. And that's really where the deficit is. Like I was bemoaning the, you have to download 2 days, like you have to spend 2 days downloading the blockchain to do shielded transactions. So right now we're really interested in anything that makes shielded transactions easier and more accessible. So like an example would be, actually this is something we need. If anyone listening is interested in this, like hit us up. But you know how WordPress has like e-commerce plugins? We need something like that for shielded Zcash so that you can conveniently sell and manage orders that you're taking in shielded Zcash. Way more tools that interact with the shielded memo field. This is a really cool aspect of Zcash is that shielded transactions can have a 512 byte memo attached. So I forget how many, it usually translates to 512 characters unless you're using an ASCII character that takes up like multiple, I forget exactly how this works, but basically you have 500-ish characters of message that you can attach to any transaction. So you can send a like 0.001 ZEC or even 0 ZEC transaction and use it as a messaging system. And it's protected by the same zero-knowledge cryptography. So for example, I use this to host a anonymous public bulletin board where I have a public shielded address and people can send to my shielded address from their shielded address. No one can see what address they were sending from because the ZK snarks protects it. And then, so whatever memo they send to me, I put up on my website as long as I'm legally allowed to. Which so far no one has sent me anything I wasn't legally allowed to. But that's an example of the flexibility here. Viewing keys are another thing. So once we have, view keys are supported in the protocol, but like not implemented. They've been spec'd out, but no one has really actually written the software to use them. Like they're not supported in Zcash D right now. But those, what they let you do is selective disclosure. So you can disclose, like for an address, a certain transaction, I think you would be able to use them to expose like a certain time period, like say you want to show someone the history of your account for a certain week. I'm not positive that the time-based one is actually true. That may have just been discussed as something that would be cool, but can you also hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, it looks like you can. Does that answer your question?
Maybe just to go off the shielded transactions you were just talking about, do you see any illegal activity on Zcash the way we do on Bitcoin or perhaps Monero?
A little bit, not a lot. I think the lack of accessibility of the privacy features and the sort of you've had to be pretty geeky to use them up until now, and actually still to an extent now. So I think if you're like random ransomware person, you'd rather use BTC just because it's easier. And I think same goes for Monero. Like it's just easier, and it just because of the default and.
Oh.
Well, we made it 45 minutes. I mean,
Oh, we're back.
are we back?
Are we back?
Yeah, yeah, we're back. Maybe. Yep.
Maybe.
Can you guys see and hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for being willing to have a conversation. I feel like I don't know, I don't want to talk for that long. I already have such a talking impulse, like we don't really need more.
Oh, I love to talk with anyone about cryptocurrency. Sometimes it's hard to find people who are willing to geek out with you.
Yeah. Rolling because it's like.
So what got you guys interested in cryptocurrency?
Yeah, so me personally, I started really getting into it right before I started college. Right now I'm a junior, and so I was looking at, I didn't really understand what was going on. It was just magic money, right? That's cool. So I tried to start mining, was the very first thing I started to try to do. Of course, right? Because it's free internet money. Free internet money. Then I realized that mining isn't all that profitable. But luckily, I had chosen a coin that was not very reputable. Let's just say it was a pump and dump, because it was one that so I didn't know anything at the time. It was a pump and dump coin. It was small enough that my little tiny computer could actually pool mine it and get currency. Like I'd finally built up to the limit that the pool would pay me out.
You got to dump on the water pool?
I discovered it was totally a crapshoot, but I managed before I was even a freshman in college. I managed to find a pump and dump. Didn't know what I was doing, and then was in on it I was in on it during the pump, and I sold at the peak. It was great. So I made like $10. Then of course I was hooked. Mining on a laptop, it was great. But that got me.
I have to say, I've never made money on cryptocurrency fiat. I've only made money on cryptocurrency through getting a salary due to having a job related to it. Although, actually, I guess I probably made a little bit money on BTC, but I just lost so much by using Zcash that it's totally insignificant anyway. Because I actually spend Zcash. So every time I spend it, I'm like, I bought this at a $15 higher value. Cool. my taxes are going to be the worst. I can't wait.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. So, anyways,
What about you?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. What are the other cryptocurrency entry stories? You mentioned that for you it was the economic argument. What about for? I guess I'm pointing at you, and I could be pointing at anyone. So
Yeah. Oh, so I as well did the same mining back in 2017. I wasn't 18, so like mining was the only way to like actually get Bitcoin rather than registering an account through Coinbase or Bittrex and BitMEX and all those other trading platforms, exchanges. So mining kind of made it easier for me to save it on my wallet address, and I used to like spend it online whenever a site offered it or so. I mean, it was really tough because a lot of sites didn't take Bitcoin, and so I'd have to exchange it to like another, like let's say Steam gift card. That way, like I can purchase those. Like there were sites that offer exchange or cash, like BitcoinCash.com, I think, and like basically using those when I wasn't able to like get a bank account, it actually helped me a lot. But besides that, I wasn't really much of like trading in terms of like short-term trading. I was more into like the technology and how like it wasn't really regulated. Like let's say a bank was, where the bank holds my money, and like I don't have like as much access as I needed to. So like at times where things happen, if a bank, for instance, any like disaster happens at a bank, it's kind of like tough to like access your money, or even like cash. Cash is like starting to become a problem, and in terms of like technology, I like blockchain and was really interested in how that was like a really cool concept, and knew that it was just the birth of it. Like, it's not at like its peak yet, cryptocurrency. I think it needs more development, and definitely there's a huge reward incentive for people that are in it this early and able to survive through the Wild West, because like losing your coins, losing your wallet address, that's the main thing that happened a lot to people, and like they quit, but if you don't quit, technically you're in for a long ride.
Yeah, and I like that you were talking about how even when you were 18, you cared about your autonomy, really.
Yeah.
Like, if it's your money, it should be your money.
Yeah.
You control it. And for me, that's really the reason I'm interested in cryptocurrency is censorship resistance. That's what got me excited about Bitcoin in the first place, is that no government, in theory, could stop you from using it. And we found, like, over the years, we've discovered a lot of ways in which I would say it's incomplete, or it's always an arms race, I think, between censorship and free speech, effectively, and also between privacy and surveillance. There's always an arms race. But I'm definitely on the anti-censorship, robust privacy. Like, for me, that's the point of Zcash, is that it's privacy that you control. So I like that there are viewing keys, because then you can share things with people when you want to. They have to ask you first. They have to get your permission. Or technically they have to get your private keys, so they could always torture it out of you. But then that's a nice thing about the privacy features, is they have to figure out who you are and find you in the first place before they can get to that level. I know it's such a cliche, but I can already feel myself getting made fun of on some like cryptocurrency people or cringe subreddit. But if the Jews had had money that couldn't be confiscated, and especially money that the existence of which could be hidden, they'd be in a lot better situation pre-Holocaust in terms of getting the hell out of the country.
Yeah.
And this applies to almost any atrocity, especially any atrocity where there were some indications beforehand, is that one of the ways that authoritarian regimes crack down on their citizens is through financial controls. And how badly they do that depends. But like when I learned about Operation Choke Point in the U.S., which was using regulatory soft power to illegally pressure legal business, to pressure banks not to provide financial services to legal businesses that were arbitrarily decided to be high risk, some of which are probably high risk, but others were just considered undesirable by the Obama administration, actually. I have no personal ire towards Obama. It just happened to be his administration. I think any administration would have done this just because governments always abuse their power. Sorry, I should have warned you guys that I'm a little bit of a crazy libertarian. We've hit on my crazy libertarian rant.
That makes two of us.
If anyone wants to push back on me here, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, you're amongst friends, don't worry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean.
If you're saying something right now, I can't hear you.
Oh, don't
I'm
worry.
not sure if this is network issues on my side or yours.
If you can hear us,
We're all on the same page.
yeah,
Frozen.
yeah, I think we lost.
Yeah.
Live streaming is on.
Are we back? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? I
Yes,
think
we
there's a
can.
little bit of a lag, so I'm probably going to awkwardly interrupt you. Yeah, I think it just happened.
All right.
Where were we?
Libertarians. That makes two of us.
So you're amongst friends. Yeah, don't worry about what you think you're gonna say.
Oh.
We are? Oh, does someone have a question on YouTube?
Yeah, someone just posted a question on the chat. It says, can Zcash survive without the ECC? If so, ECC. If so, when do you think that may happen?
Oh, that is a very good and difficult question. Well, one part of it is easy. Can Zcash survive the death of ECC? Yes. Yes. I mean, Zcash doesn't need that much to survive. Will Zcash thrive without ECC? That's a much harder question. Can Zcash succeed without ECC? At what point in time, I guess, becomes a factor. Like if ECC disappeared right now, that would be a huge blow to Zcash and would really blow things up. If ECC disappears in 5 years, honestly, I don't know. It depends on what's going on then, what the dynamics are, who the other groups involved are. So I think it's a hard question to give a straight answer to. But I mean, like Dogecoin is still around. It doesn't take that much to survive. And I think people are still using IRC. Like protocols hang around a long time after they are ascendant. And then when that may happen, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I have some visibility into what's going on with ECC, but not much more than anybody else. So the Zcash Foundation and ECC do work with each other and coordinate. Like we're working out a joint trademark agreement over the Zcash trademark, for example. But we are intentionally separate and independent entities. So I think there is, we could theoretically, have more joint strategizing and stuff, but part of the point of having two different entities is so that you don't have that. So I guess one way of putting that is that we could collude more, but intentionally choose not to. And a big part of, as I was saying earlier, of wanting to decentralize Zcash governance at least a little bit more is that those possibilities for collusion really shouldn't even be there. And in the ideal future for Zcash, it's too costly for collusion to affect governance. That would, or at least that would be the ideal for me, is you have a sort of trust minimized setup where a cabal of entities would have a hard time coordinating privately to do something that everybody else doesn't want. Right now, we have to kind of rely on good intentions, which is a little bit nerve-wracking for a, I don't know, what's Zcash's market cap right now? It's at least more than $100 million. I don't keep track of the price that closely because it all just, I think anyone who's been around long enough is just like, you get sort of immune to price anxiety unless it's like a big sudden drastic change.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are hitting almost an hour here. Do you guys want to, I don't know, go out for beers or whatever?
I had a quick question on the plugin for the Zcash, how you said WordPress has a similar plugins, something of that sort. What programming language would that be? Would that be like C++? I'm assuming.
I think, yeah, so Zcash D is written in C, and then there's a fair bit of tooling in Rust, but there are also libraries in a bunch of different languages. So I think there's a fair amount of flexibility, actually, in terms of what language you would build with. And that's something, like, if you're interested in that, hit me up. My email address is sonya@zfnd.org. That's SONYA@zfnd.org. You can like find it in the live stream later or something. And I can hook you up with someone who would be able to dig into like frameworks and, you know, what kind of stack you would want, basically. That's a little out of my wheelhouse, but.
All right. But yep, you're completely right. We're coming up on an hour, so we don't want to take up any more of your time. Thank you so much for being willing to talk to us for this time.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate, like I said earlier, that you pitched in and helped me do the conversation, I guess.
We're really
it was a group effort.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yep, we're trying to get the word out here, so yep.
Small group that's growing.
All right. You all have a great night.
Yep. You too. All right.
All right, bye.
Bye.